it is really important to understand anemia in simple terms and also to understand why behavior matter for prevention of anemia. And
As you, all of you would be knowing that anemia happens within the body when there is not enough healthy red blood cells or hemoglobin to carry adequate oxygen to the tissue, and oxygen is the fuel which kind of helps us do our daily activities. So there are very solid biological basis of anemia, and this is well understood. Uh, the causes of anemia are also deeply correlated with everyday behavior and living conditions. There may be some immediate causes of anemia, like inadequate intake of iron, other micronutrients like vitamin B12, folate, which is vitamin B9. However, there are other conditions, for example, frequent infections, intestinal worm infestation, and conditions, for example, damage to the gut lining, reduced stomach acids, or certain gastrointestinal disorders which inhibit iron absorption. However, while these biological factors are well known, there are also certain behavioral and social practices which lead to anemia amongst individuals. The first is about diet monotony, which means that an individual's meal or the food which an individual take, it relies heavily on staples. For example, rice, wheat. However, there is limited intake of pulses, there is limited intake of GLVs or green leafy vegetables, animal source protein, iron intake, and overall quality of diet happens to be compromised. And this became so much more evident when COVID had hit us, when people actually started substituting the healthier options with cheaper alternatives. Then there are the second condition is constant infection, which is induced because of poor hygiene practices, lack of deworming. While there is National Deworming Day, which is a important program of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. However, that program's implementation in hard to reach pocket presents certain challenges, and these basically kind of repeated infections and infestations, it increase nutrient loss and also impairs the body's ability to use iron effectively. The third very important point is early pregnancy, which is again exacerbated with the fact that a lot of girls get married off before before reaching their age of 19, which then leads to increasing the risk of anemia because the body's iron requirements increases significantly during adolescence and pregnancy. Then we know that there are gendered food practices within households which actually limit women's intake of iron rich foods. And addressing anemia, it requires both biological and behavior and social norms change. These norms basically sustain those behaviors. So this is very, very critical. Now, if we were to see what is the impact of anemia, anemia remains one of the most large scale, widespread nutritional problems globally and in India, affecting a large proportion of children, adolescents, women, and its serious consequences range from adverse impacts on health, productivity, overall quality of life, and it induces certain kind of discomforts and certain kinds of conditions, like it increases fatigue, it increases weakness, it reduces physical endurance, and there is overall poor concentration, and these can thus lead to poor educational attainment, lower work productivity, and overall the country's economic potential decreases. And the risk of anemia, it varies across the life cycle. Children less than 5 years, so children aged 6 months to 5 years of age are particularly vulnerable because that is the period of rapid growth. Then we have adolescents, specifically girls who face heightened risk because of the second growth spurt amongst adolescents and onset of menstruation, which increases iron requirements. Then pregnant women, because they are actually not only require iron for themselves but also for the growing fetus within their bodies, they also require significantly um, uh, extra proportion or extra amount of iron. And if diets are inadequate or if supplementation is not adequate, because there are several issues and challenges with supplementation itself, in terms of behaviors around taking the supplement, in terms of the supply chain ensuring that the supplement reaches to the last mile. Then lactating women again, they also require certain nutrients to maintain their overall health and supporting the infant nutrition. Thus, addressing anemia requires that we look at it across the entire life cycle. Now, let us quickly look at why we think behavior matters, because here we are all here to talk about behavior change, social norms, why it is equally important as much as treatment. Because the general approach to anemia reduction in medical, in a country like India settings, is medical intervention. For example, there is hemoglobin estimation, and then based on that estimation, iron folic acid supplementation. These are essential. We all know that these are essential. However, prevention, it depends largely on everyday practices, both within households and within communities. Many early signs of anemia are present. For example, as I had already mentioned, there would be fatigue, there would be pale skin, there would be breathlessness, poor concentration. However, these are often overlooked in day to day life. As a result, anemia remains often an undetected problem or a hidden problem till it becomes very severe. Identification and prevention of anemia, thus, to my belief, it requires a lot of awareness. Beyond clinical testing alone, yes, clinical testing will give you the exact help you to identify those who are suffering and then provide medical therapy. But then identification and early onset or early detection or early onset is also equally important. And there are several household practices which needs to be looked at. For example, the food preparation, how we prepare our food, hygiene, overall health seeking behaviors, then supplement adherence to the supplement. So the iron folic acid supplement is which is given. There is a protocol how we should consume those supplements. So those needs to be strictly adhered, and behavioral actions are there which can significantly influence anemia outcomes. So when families they recognize the early symptoms and adopt preventive practices, my belief is that addressing anemia or the likelihood of anemia happening in an individual is substantially reduced. Now, there are certain food related behavior and anemia risk. So dietary habits, they are central to anemia prevention, especially looking at iron nutritional anemia. In many households, we have daily meals which are dominated by staples which are low in iron. Consumption of iron-rich foods like pulses, millets, GLVs, eggs, meat, fortified foods, these remains limited. And oftentimes what has happened is because of everyday routine, people often skip meals, and that it can be due to time constraint, it may be due to work pressure or dieting, which is a current fad nowadays. I prefer healthy eating than to have practicing certain kinds of crash diets. These can reduce nutrient intake, particularly among adolescents and women. Food avoidance practices, this is also we have seen in certain communities and certain age groups. It can contribute to inadequate iron intake. Certain foods are oftentimes, restricted for individuals due to misconceptions about digestion, what food to be consumed during pregnancy. There are certain concepts of hot food, cold food, and food to be avoided during pregnancy, which may be very rich in iron. Then also we have our very peculiar eating habits. For example, we tend to consume food, caffeine. We tend to consume coffee and tea immediately after meals. So if you take any meals on the flight, the air hostess comes to you with a mug and offers you tea or coffee, which is supposed to be strictly no if you are looking at a behavior which improves iron absorption and reducing anemia within the body. Then what we also kind of are currently also telling that why don't you consume vitamin C rich foods, for example, a slice of lemon or amla along with along with your meals, which will increase iron absorption. Thus, what to my belief that everyday food choices and meal patterns, they directly influence whether the body receives and absorbs adequate iron. Then, what is the role of the household does um, uh, in terms of decision making and cultural norms? I believe that anemia is also kind of influenced by the broader social and cultural dynamics within households. Decisions about what food to purchase, how to prepare it, or what to prepare and distribute it are often kind of influenced by social hierarchies and gender roles. In many settings, women are, and girls, they may eat last. This is a well-known fact. My next speakers will also probably be highlighting about these. They may eat last, or they may receive smaller portions of the nutrient-rich food. So the bigger portions are generally reserved for the men in the households. And this is particularly, we have seen that this is very prevalent in resource constrained settings. So these practices, they can lead to chronic nutritional deficit and thus increase the risk of anemia amongst women and adolescent girls. Then there are, I have already mentioned this, there are cultural beliefs and food taboos during pregnancy. So they may reduce consumption of nutritious food at a time when the need for the nutritious diets and iron rich foods are probably at the highest. For example, there are communities which discourage pregnant women for eating certain types of foods, eggs or protein rich foods. And they fear that the misconception is if you eat this kind of foods, it may lead to difficulties in childbirth, and there may be it can lead to difficulties in digesting the food properly. In fact, iron folic acid low adherence to iron folic acid supplementation is also one of the some of the taboos or cultural beliefs is that if because of the color of the tablet the child will become dark, or the child will increase in have such an increase in size that it will be difficult during childbirth. So these norms can unintentionally actually limit nutrient intake and increase or exacerbate the risk of anemia. Addressing anemia, therefore, it requires engaging families and communities to reconsider these norms and promote equitable food distribution. So, a woman who is pregnant or lactating needs more food than other members of the family and needs to be pampered and cared for. And this is something I would like to highlight is supportive dietary practices, which actually supports the growth spurts in individuals, supports young children, supports adolescents, supports women who need more because they are either carrying a child inside or they are carrying or directly feeding their children. Then, what is the importance of consistent preventive behaviors? Preventive anemia is thus simply not about providing information. Providing information does not lead to behavior change. It actually requires consistent and sustained behavioral practices. Individuals and families, they must integrate a set of very small but regular habits into their daily routines. For example, consuming a diverse diet that includes iron rich foods, and many of these iron rich foods are actually available within the community. You don't need to go to a very costly food, don't need to include a costly food in your diet to increase the iron availability within the households. Regularly taking the iron folic acid supplements as recommended by the Anemia Mukt Bharat protocols or any state which is running similar programs. Then combining iron rich foods with vitamin C, consuming a little bit of amla or lemon juice, just squeeze 2 drops of lemon juice into your food when you consume. It also increases the taste of the food to improve absorption. And last but not the least, this is what I tell in every meeting I attend is please limit your tea and coffee intake 1 hour before and after food. This is a very simple habit, but probably very difficult to follow. And sometimes when I am also offered, I also take, but then I realize, oh my God, I probably have not practiced what I preach. Additional practices, for example, maintaining hygiene, using safe sanitation, participate in periodic. So in India, there is this National Deworming Day. Please, communities should be encouraged to participate. These can help in reduce infections that contribute to anemia. When these behaviors become routine at the household and community levels, they create an enabling environment for anemia prevention. In way, behavior change complements clinical interventions, and strengthens efforts to reduce anemia across the life cycle. There can be certain collective actions, for example, through homes, schools, workplaces, community groups, which can strengthen accountability and motivation for prevention of anemia. There are school-based IFA supplementation programs. There are peer support groups within communities within the SRLM or State Rural Livelihoods Mission. Community-led nutrition campaigns, for example, the entire Poshan 2.0 is a community-led nutrition campaign. And involvement of local champions, this is what we have seen, at least in hard to reach tribal areas, involving local champions, young girls who can be the harbingers, who can be the messengers of pushing the anemia related messages amongst their peers and communities. We have seen a very positive result going forward. They have shown promising results in improving dietary practices and supplement uptake. By building on these successful approaches and scaling them through existing community structures, please understand we are not at all advocating building a new structure. So whatever structure is existing, moving and working through those structures, and then anemia prevention can become a shared and sustained priority, because many times this is not seen, which I have already mentioned. The early signs which the body gives that the body, that probably the individual is becoming anemic, those signs are often ignored. And so this will help anemia prevention become a shared and sustained priority, and it will ensure healthier outcomes across the life cycle, thus building healthy individuals and healthy society. Thank you.